We had an area of forest which wasn't particularly high value from a timber point of view. It was a very wet area, but which was highly important for nature conservation. And we were looking at a way in which we could remove trees from areas which join together these fragments for wildlife and get the funding we needed to be able to manage these areas in a way that was appropriate. The lottery application for us, for the Forestry Commission, at its heart was around fencing, being able to enclose these areas, and then being able to get the right sort of animals that could come in and graze the land. The traditional Longhorn breed was recommended to us as one of the best graziers to manage this type of habitat.
The removal of the conifers was a pretty traumatic period in itself, in that it was a massive change that happened very rapidly, and we were left with a landscape that was, pretty depressing to look at for the first, certainly for the first 12 months. And to think that over just a 5-year period, we could go from that to what is now a green, diverse series of enclosures and glades within the forest is quite remarkable.
Well, the felling of the woodland, of course, creates a brand new seedbed for all sorts of things to occupy, and some of the more vigorous and early colonizing species, such as bramble, thistles, and particularly pendulous sedge in this case, can swamp out many of the smaller wildflowers and fine leaf grasses that we want to see develop in turn into these rich grassland communities. The Longhorn cattle seem to be particularly adept at dealing with a quite un-farmland-like forage environment. They do a lot of browsing. They readily graze the rushes, the bulky sedges. They take bramble as well, and some of these fairly unpalatable species. You can see them pulling down ivy even. With their horns, they bend over young saplings to browse the foliage and so forth. So in many ways, they're the closest thing we possibly have to the sorts of wild cattle that once roamed Britain and shaped our woodlands and maintained open habitats and clearings.
We've been able to measure that progress through the use of technical experts, but also with the involvement of our volunteers, by simply coming into these areas repeatedly, year after year, and recording the number of species of plants, both flowering plants and grasses, that are growing in a given 2 square metres of ground. So we've established permanent plots that we come back and measure year after year to see how the flora has changed. And the records from that are really quite remarkable. We now see in these areas that we've cleared that over a space of 5 years, from a complete standing start of being completely bare open ground, in many of these plots we now have between 25 and 30 flowering plants already re-established in these areas. So the capacity of the ground to clothe itself and to allow that richness to spread out from those tiny glades into those open spaces is really extraordinary.
I think the Longhorn animals, as such, have been ideal for us in that they've proved to be docile, which was important with the general public using the site a great deal, and they've been able to cope with the sort of vegetation that you get after you've felled trees.
The first couple of times we encountered them, they are frightening. They don't look welcoming, but they are. They've been described as docile, and they are. They just stand there, and if you can walk through them, they don't move. They just stand. Well, you've got to walk around them because they won't move. But they are very docile creatures.
Because normally with a conservation herd, people will use non-breeding animals. They will use bullocks, and that way they can graze areas quite hard and not worry too much about, for example, calves. For us, the whole economics of this job was based around having a crop of calves at the end of the year that could be sold, developed as a high-value meat product, or bred up for and sold for breeding purposes.
I think we underestimated the scale of the job of managing a large herd of cattle that are disparately spread across 7 large grazing units in a very diverse forest. And initially, we had an agreement with one grazier, Chris Salisbury, who was attempting to cover that entire job by himself.
You know, this area is lovely. I can drive around and I just look round, and it's so you could be something just as a shadow or a movement, or it might well be in a minute we just have to get out and walk. But when it's hot like this, they very often just sit in the shade, and because of their colour, they are incredibly difficult to spot. We thought that these traditional breed, the Longhorns, would do very well on rough grazing, which is true. We were completely right on that. They thrive out here, but apparently there's not very much to eat. The calves have been fairly slow to grow, but we've put that down to their grazing and the fact they're an older traditional breed which takes longer to mature. With copper supplementation, we hope to improve it. Our conception rates are low. We were putting this down to a combination of factors. The cows walk over tremendous areas, so it's difficult for the bull to be with every cow when he needs to be. And talking to other Longhorn breeders, we've discovered that an awful lot of them are saying, yes, well, that cow only has a calf every 18 months, whereas we had budgeted to have a cow every year, which we would in a commercial situation.
If you add to that the fact that we also added to the mix an experiment in terms of how we wanted to overwinter the cattle. So we chose to build a wood chip corral, an overwintering corral, next to the forest.
This was recommended by a whole range of different experts to us, but I'm afraid we encountered a number of difficulties, particularly after a hard winter.
It was not able to withstand the vagaries of the very severe winters that we've had over the last few years. We had situations where the surface of the corral froze up and stopped draining. We had situations where it was very wet and very muddy, and the conditions were not appropriate for the cattle.
So we've made the decision that from now on in, we will not be trying to overwinter the animals outdoors on a corral. We will be going back to what is the conventional system for wintering these sort of beef animals, which is to put them indoors once ground conditions become inappropriate for grazing in the winter.
We've taken time to reassess our options in the meantime, and having taken the cattle away from the Black Downs for one winter, over that period we were able to enter into new arrangements with 2 new graziers, so that each of them would have a much more manageable task to take on.
I've had some already on another part of the Forestry Commission's land, and yeah, they sometimes can take a couple hours to find, but they're getting better. They're getting used to me, and they will come when I call them now. Come on! Hey! Come on! Come on!
You're the one that likes doing it, can't you, Cat? You're all right. My role is to monitor the health and welfare of the cattle,
and I do monthly visits, but the farmers who are looking after them look at them daily and count them. And I've just spoken to John Binney, who looks after these cattle. He hasn't been able to find them all, so he'll be back this evening to find the ones that he hasn't been able to find. So they are closely monitored the whole time.
The challenges are to try to get the calving rate up is the main thing, because we've suffered from poor calving rates in the past, or the project has, and even this year we've only got 16 out of 28 cows in calf.
One of the things that has been key to the project throughout has been trying to think ahead as to what happens after the lottery money runs out. With the grazing project, what we're putting in place is arrangements with farmers which will last for hopefully at least 10 years, preferably longer. And we've entered into a farm business tenancy with the Blackdown Hills Trust, who will take responsibility for overseeing the grazing.
And we're in the process, as we speak, of negotiating high-level stewardship agreements with Natural England. And those will provide payments on an annual basis over a 10-year period to our graziers through an agreement which involves the Blackdown Hills Trust as well. And that will effectively cushion the process of trying to bed in a grazing system which works in all respects.
The big advantage for us is that puts the sort of management and the delivery of the project back in the hands of local people. We've ensured that we've got a mechanism locally which will give this project the best chance of success. I've really enjoyed working with farmers, trying to come up with practical ways of dealing with all sorts of issues which have cropped up. This is not like a normal farm situation. We're trying to bring grazing animals, breeding animals, into a woodland. We're not in a field situation. We've cut down trees and we're working with the vegetation that comes up. There are so many unknowns. The challenge of getting it right, to me, has been really exciting.
I have to keep reminding myself that we can look at a forest which has been transformed, basically. It's been transformed visually and it has been transformed ecologically. And we are seeing the return of species of flowering plant and the butterflies and other insects that feed on them into huge swathes of open spaces where previously those plants were confined to tiny little glades, isolated spaces in a sea of closed woodland. So we're ending up with something that is a truly diverse and truly mixed forest, which has the space to support a much wider range of wildlife than I think previously was the case.